April 29th, 1945. A train pulls into a station in Austria. Inside one of the open coal trucks, hundreds of skeletal prisoners are crammed together. Some are already dead. Others won't last the day. Among them, a woman. She weighs 35 kilograms. She hasn't eaten properly in months, and she is 9 months pregnant. When the train stops and she sees the name of the station, she goes into labor right there on the coal truck in the cold. The name of the station is Mauthausen, one of the most feared places in all of Europe, and in that moment, on that cart, she gives birth to a baby girl. The baby weighs 3 pounds, 3 pounds, smaller than a bag of sugar, and if the train had arrived just 2 days earlier, the gas chambers would still have been running. Neither of them would have survived. This is not fiction. This is the true story of Anka Bergman, a woman who hid her pregnancy through Auschwitz, through a slave labor factory, through a 17-day journey in an open coal truck in the dead of winter, and delivered a miracle at the gates of hell. To understand what Anka survived, you first need to understand who she was before. Anka Kaldrova was born in 1917 in Czechoslovakia. She was not someone you would expect to end up in a story like this. She was a university law student in Prague. Brilliant, ambitious, full of life. She was a junior swimming champion of Czechoslovakia. She spoke multiple languages. She was the kind of woman who walked into a room and made people stop talking. In 1940, she married Bernd Nathan, a German Jewish architect who had fled Hamburg to escape the Nazis. The irony is devastating. He ran to Czechoslovakia to escape Nazi Germany. The Nazis followed him there too. By the time they married, the occupation had already begun. They were forced to wear yellow stars. Their friends disappeared, one by one. And in December 1941, the order came. Anka and Bernd were to report to a warehouse near the train station. They didn't know it yet, but they were being sent to Theresienstadt, a concentration camp disguised as a ghetto. The Nazis called it a model Jewish settlement, a place they showed to Red Cross inspectors to hide the truth of what was really happening. But the truth was simple. Theresienstadt was not a destination. It was a waiting room for Auschwitz. Life in Theresienstadt was a slow starvation. Overcrowded barracks, disease everywhere, constant fear. Anka managed to secure a job distributing food to prisoners, which allowed her to steal small scraps for 14 members of her family who had also been imprisoned there. 14 people, depending on what she could hide in her pockets. Men and women were strictly separated, but Anka and Bernd found ways to meet in secret. Brief, dangerous meetings, acts of love, in a place designed to destroy everything human. And in one of those secret meetings, Anka became pregnant. A boy. They named him Jizzy. He was born in February 1944, and he died 2 months later of pneumonia. 2 months old. Anka held her son, and then she buried him in a concentration camp while the Nazis watched. She had no idea that years later, she would say something that sounds almost impossible to hear. If Jizzy had lived, I would not be alive today, because what happened next would prove her right. In September 1944, Bernd was suddenly deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Anka didn't know what Auschwitz was. Almost nobody did. The Nazis kept its true purpose a secret. And Anka, already pregnant again, this time with a pregnancy that didn't yet show, made a decision that defied all logic. She volunteered to follow her husband. She chose to go to Auschwitz willingly because she didn't know, because she loved him, because she thought they would be together. That decision would cost her everything and save her daughter's life. The train journey to Auschwitz took 3 days, 80 people, packed into a single cattle car, no food, no water, no light, no room to lie down. People could only stand or crouch against each other, the heat of bodies in summer, the cold of the iron walls at night, children crying until they had no more strength to cry, elderly people dying standing up because there was no room to fall. The only sanitation was a single bucket that overflowed within hours. By the second day, people were going mad in the darkness. By the third day, some had already died. When the doors finally opened and the light flooded in, Anka had to shield her eyes. After 3 days of darkness, the light was blinding. And then she saw the platform. She saw the officers with their dogs. She saw the rows of striped uniforms, the hollow faces of prisoners who had been there for months. She saw Joseph Mengele, the doctor of death, standing there in his impeccable white gloves and polished boots, directing the flow of human beings with a casual flick of his hand. Left, right, left, right. Those who could work went right. Those who could not. The elderly, the children, the sick, the pregnant went left. Left meant the gas chambers. Most people on that platform would be dead within hours. Anka didn't know this yet. She was looking for Bernd, scanning the crowd desperately, searching for his face among thousands of terrified strangers. Families were being ripped apart in seconds, screaming, chaos, mothers reaching for children being pulled away, husbands separated from wives in a single moment, never to see each other again. She never found him. Mengele looked at Anka, young, healthy, strong-build. He pointed right. She was selected for labor. She would never see Bernd again. She would learn after the war that he had been shot on a death march on January 18th, 1945. He never knew she was pregnant. He never knew he had a daughter. He died, not knowing. Now inside the camp, Anka understood for the first time what this place truly was. The smell hit her before she understood it. That particular smell that survivors have described for decades, that cannot be explained to someone who wasn't there. The smoke rising from the chimneys day and night. The silence of 1,500 women packed into a barracks designed for 400. 3 women sharing a single wooden bunk, unable to turn over without waking the others. 1 bowl of watery soup per day, a piece of bread so small it could fit in one hand, and her pregnancy. She could feel it now, the small swell that others might notice. Pregnancy was an automatic death sentence. Pregnant women were sent directly to the gas chambers. There were no exceptions. If anyone discovered she was expecting, both she and the baby would be dead before morning. So Anka did something that required a level of courage most of us will never understand. She decided to hide it every single day. She bound her stomach tighter with torn strips of fabric. She stood differently, walked differently, moved differently. She volunteered for the hardest labor, so no guard would look at her too closely. She monitored every expression on the face of every woman around her, watching for any sign that someone had noticed. She starved, and paradoxically, the starvation helped conceal the pregnancy. Her body had so little fat that the bump grew slowly. invisibly, hidden beneath layers of fabric and desperation. Week after week, month after month, every morning waking up and thinking, today might be the day they find out. Every night surviving and starting again tomorrow, hiding a life growing inside her from the people whose entire purpose was to end both their lives. And then, in late 1944, something unexpected happened. Anka was selected for transfer out of Auschwitz to a slave labor armaments factory in Freiberg, Germany. She was still alive, the baby was still hidden, and the war was finally beginning to turn. In the factory in Freiberg, Anka spent 6 months building weapons for the war machine, 12-hour shifts, standing in the cold, her belly growing larger every week. She was now visibly pregnant. There was no hiding it anymore. Not completely, but the guards either didn't notice or chose not to see. Some historians believe certain guards looked away deliberately as the war was ending and they feared what was coming for them. Others say it was simply the chaos of a collapsing empire where the machinery of evil was beginning to break down under its own weight. Either way, Anka survived Freiberg, 6 months of slave labor, 6 months of standing at a machine for 12 hours a day, building weapons for the people who had taken everything from her. 6 months of watching her belly grow and praying nobody looked too closely. But then came the worst part of all, not Theresienstadt, not Auschwitz. What came next? April 1945. The Allied forces were closing in from every direction. The Russians from the east, the Americans from the west. The SS began evacuating the facilities, desperately trying to move prisoners, destroy evidence, erase what they had done. Prisoners who couldn't walk were shot where they stood. No hesitation, no mercy. Those who could still move were loaded onto trains, open coal trucks, no roof, no walls, no shelter from the elements. April in Austria is not summer. It is cold, it rains, it snows. The wind cuts through everything. Anka, 9 months pregnant, weighing just 35 kilograms, was loaded onto one of those coal trucks. The journey lasted 17 days. 17 days. No food, barely any water, in an open truck, in the cold Austrian spring that felt like winter. People dying around her every single day. Bodies being thrown from the moving train to make room for the living. She had survived Theresienstadt. She had survived Auschwitz. She had survived 6 months of slave labor in Freiberg. And now this, an open coal truck in the Austrian mountains. 9 months pregnant, 35 kilograms, 17 days. There are moments in history that defy all human logic, that make you ask, what keeps a person alive when every single physical condition says they should already be dead? What is that thing inside a human being that simply refuses to stop? For Anka, part of the answer came on one of those 17 days. The train slowed near a small farm somewhere in the Austrian countryside. A farmer appeared beside the tracks. He looked at the truck full of dying people. He looked at Anka, a pregnant skeleton, barely able to stand, her eyes sunken, her cheekbones sharp as blades, and he did something extraordinary, something that could have gotten him beaten, or worse. He walked toward the train, past the guard standing at the side with a whip, and he reached up and handed her a glass of milk. Just a glass of milk, nothing more. No words, no explanation. He just looked at her, handed it to her, and walked away. Anka drank it, every single drop. She would say for the rest of her long life, that glass of milk saved her daughter, one anonymous Austrian farmer, one glass of milk, on one of the darkest roads in human history. Sometimes that is all it takes. One person, one moment, one choice to be human, when everything around you has stopped being human. The train kept moving. Anka kept surviving. And somewhere inside her, against all reason, a baby kept growing. April 29th, 1945, day 17 of the journey. The train slows. Anka can see a sign through the cold morning air. Mauthausen. She knew that name. Unlike Auschwitz, whose true purpose had been hidden from the world. Mauthausen's reputation had spread even through the camps. Prisoners whispered about it. A place where people were worked to death in stone quarries, where prisoners were forced to carry heavy rocks up 186 steps, over and over, until they collapsed and died. A place from which almost nobody returned. She knew what it meant, and her body responded before her mind could even process it. Her water broke, right there, on the coal truck, at the gates of Mauthausen. 9 months of hiding, 9 months of impossible survival. Auschwitz, Freiberg, 17 days in an open coal truck in the cold. And now, this. Other prisoners helped her down from the truck onto a wooden cart. No doctor, no nurse, no hospital, no anesthesia, no clean water, no tools. Just a wooden cart on the ground, outside the gates of one of the most feared places in Europe, and a group of skeletal women who had nothing left, forming a circle around her, shielding her from the guards with their own bodies. These women who had been stripped of everything, their homes, their families, their names, their dignity. These women still had this, the instinct to protect new life. The circle held. The guards didn't approach, and Anka gave birth. The baby was so small it seemed impossible she could survive. 3 pounds, 1.3 kilograms, smaller than most people's hands. She wasn't breathing properly at first. The women around her worked desperately, rubbing the tiny body, willing her to breathe, and then a sound, small and fragile, but unmistakable. The baby cried. Anka named her Eva, and then in the hour that followed, she learned what she had missed by just 2 days. On April 28th, the day before Eva was born, the SS had blown up Mauthausen's gas chambers. They destroyed them to hide the evidence before the Allies arrived. If the train had arrived on April 27th, the chambers would still have been running. Anka and Eva would have been taken there within hours of arrival. 2 days, a margin of 2 days, between death and the rest of their lives. The train had been delayed somewhere along those 17 days. A mechanical problem, a block track. Nobody knows exactly why. But if it hadn't been delayed, Eva Clarke would never have existed. On May 5th, 6 days after Eva was born, American soldiers from the 11th Armored Division arrived at Mauthausen. One of the soldiers, walking through the liberated camp in a state of shock at what he was seeing, came upon a woman sitting on the ground holding a bundle. He stopped. He had seen unspeakable things that day, things that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But this stopped him completely. The woman looked up at him, and she said in English, "I have something to show you." She opened the bundle. Inside was a baby girl, 6 days old, 3 pounds, born at the gates of this place. The soldier wept. He was not the only one. An Army Signal Corps camera captured the moment. A woman, barely alive, holding a baby that had no business being alive. For decades, that footage sat in the National Archives in Washington, labeled simply "Woman with Young Baby." Nobody knew their names, nobody knew their story, until a historian researching a book found the footage and recognized them. That footage now plays on a screen in the Holocaust galleries of the Imperial War Museum in London, and every single person who watches it stops. Anka returned to Prague after liberation. She went back to the apartment where she and Bernd had lived. Strangers answered the door. She asked if anything of her family's remained, any photographs, any trace that they had ever existed there. They told her everything had been thrown away and closed the door in her face. In the months that followed, Anka learned the full cost of what had happened. Her husband burned, shot on a death march on January 18, 1945, just weeks before the end of the war. Her parents murdered at Auschwitz, her 2 sisters murdered at Auschwitz, her 8-year-old nephew Peter murdered at Auschwitz, 15 family members gone. Of everything she had loved, only Eva remained. Anka eventually remarried and moved to Wales. She raised Eva in Cardiff, and she became known among everyone who met her. For one thing above all else, her eternal optimism, despite everything she had seen, despite everyone she had lost. She genuinely believed that things would be all right. Eva Clarke, the baby born at the gates of Mauthausen, grew up to become one of the most important voices for Holocaust remembrance in Britain. She has told her mother's story to hundreds of thousands of people, and every time, she ends with something her mother said before her death in 2013, at the age of 96. When asked how she survived everything, Anka said simply, "I always thought it would be all right. I never stopped believing it would be all right. 3 pounds, born on a wooden cart, at the gates of a death camp, 6 days before liberation. Her name was Eva, and she is 80 years old today," which makes you wonder, what inside a human being refuses to let go? What part of us, even in the darkest, most impossible moment, still whispers, "It will be all right"? Because whatever that is, Anka had it. And because she had it, Eva exists. And because Eva exists, you are hearing this story right now. If this story moved you, share it. Because some stories deserve to be heard by more than one generation. And subscribe. Because next week, we go back into the darkest corners of history to find the people who refused to disappear.